We're going to make croissant today, and it'll take today and tomorrow before we complete the whole process. That's because we have to make the dough the night before and keep it cool and let it do a slow prove overnight, and that really does give the yeast a chance to create a lovely flavour into the dough mix itself. And the dough mix is basically a bread mix, but it's a fairly dry bread mix rather than a hydrated bread mix, so we don't put as much water in as we would do if we were making a normal loaf. I'm only going to make a pound this time, which will make about 15 croissants in the end, and for that you just need 300 ml of cold water, which will go into the bowl like so. Then you need 3 ounces, and that's more sugar than you normally have for bread, but you put 3 ounces of sugar into the mix, and then you can add your salt, and you just want half a teaspoon of salt. And that's plenty. Now you don't add the yeast at this point, because if you add yeast and salt together it can actually kill the yeast off. So now we need to put a pound of flour, that's strong white flour, into the bowl as well. And the strong white flour I can measure out in cups, and it'll equate to 3 cups of flour. That's 1, 2, 3. That's our 3 cups of flour. And to that, the last ingredient we've got to put in is the yeast, and we want to put 1 generous teaspoon of yeast into the mix. And there we are, that's all the ingredients we need to make our dough ready for making croissant tomorrow. So we'll put that into the machine. And you just want a dough hook for this, not a beater, just the standard dough hook. And set the thing going, and you need it to run for about 10 minutes. So the dough's been going now for about 10 minutes and it looks really lovely. It's nicely mixed. It's all come together, and what we're looking for, that it's clean from the sides of the bowl. But that's plenty. It just helps when you're getting the dough out in the morning. It's a very tight dough. And just cover it in cling film. And overnight it'll rise. It'll be ready in the morning. So we put it in the fridge now and see you in the morning. Before we take the dough out of the fridge, what we want to do really is to get the butter in the right consistency, because the butter has to be as hard as the dough that you're going to use. But first of all, you've got to find yourself a decent butter, and this is one particular brand of butter which has a fantastic flavour. No names, of course, and you can't see where it comes from, but it's a superb flavoured butter. You can use a salted or an unsalted. They do recommend normally you use an unsalted butter, but I prefer one that's slightly salted like this. It's got to be an expensive butter with very little water in it, so you're looking for 82, 83% fat content and the least amount of water in as possible. So what I find is useful is to take the butter out of the fridge the night before, as long as your kitchen is not too warm, so it's fairly soft. You can just feel it, you know what the feeling's like. Because now what we've got to do, we've got to flatten that into a shape that resembles 2/3 of the flattened out dough. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes now shaping the butter. The best way to flatten your butter is to use a wooden rolling pin, and when you hit the butter with it, you want to just twist the pin slightly, and then the butter won't stick to your rolling pin. So if you just do that, you'll see that it's hardly sticking to the pin. Now if it does stick to the pin, just put a little bit of flour on the butter. It won't hurt, just a little bit of flour like that. And just keep working at it until you've got it into a nice shape. So to make the amount of croissant we're doing today, which is 1 pound 1 ounce of flour mix, we need 12 ounces of butter. So that's really a pack and half a pack put together. And you can see there that we've just rolled it out to about 1/4 inch thick of both pieces, and we'll join them together on the dough itself. So here's our dough that's been in the fridge overnight. As you can see, it's quite a stiff dough, but it has nearly doubled in size and it's very cold. But that is the sort of consistency you need, which is about the same as the consistency of the butter, so that should work really well. So we're now just going to remove it out of the bowl and put it on our work surface. Okay, you don't need to work that again. That is absolutely fine. So the best thing to do is to try and get it into a square as best as you possibly can. Just use your hands like that. Make sure there's plenty of flour, because it doesn't matter about the flour being on the dough itself. Once you've got it in a sort of square, just roll it out. So what we're looking to do is to create a rectangle. At this stage, on the first rolling, it is very easy to roll out, but as we start folding the butter into it, it does become a little bit more tough and hard work, a bit of elbow grease required for it. So we just want to make sure now that that's got to be 2/3 of this here, so just keeping an eye on it and see where we've got to. And we're nearly there. We've nearly got it to the size we want it, and if you look at the thickness, it's just a little bit thicker now than the butter that we're going to put on it. So it'll be a very rich croissant. Now we're going to take the butter and we're going to place it over the dough like this, leaving a bit round the edges so that we don't get the butter running out, because the last thing you want is the butter to run off and waste in the oven. That's what you don't want to happen. So that's our one bit on there. So with this one, as you've got a funny shape with the butter, you can just cut chunks off this to fit into the side of the butter you've already put on there. One thing would be that it's a great advantage if you can work in a nice cool kitchen, it would be a great advantage. If not, you might just end up with the butter melting on you, so you're better off working like we've got here at quite a cool kitchen. This might look a bit of an odd botch up, but this is the best way of doing it. And just fill in the holes, but leave yourself an edge all around the outside. I'm not saying this is a professional way of doing it, because I'm not a professional, but the end result is lovely anyway. So there we are, we've got our butter in place, and the next stage is that we want to get it in perfect layers. So what we do, we take the side without the butter on and we fold it over like that, right to the middle there. And then we take the other side and we fold that over the top, like that. And just square it off, make it as square as possible. Now your dough might have got rather warm at this stage if you've got a warm kitchen, so it's best now to wrap it in cling film and put it in the fridge for half an hour, just so that the butter and the dough can cool down. So now we're going to do our rolling process. We've got to get about 80 folds into this dough, and already we've got 1, 2, 3 layers of dough and 2 layers of butter in. So we folded it this way. We need now to turn it round in this direction, and I'm going to use a heavier, much heavier rolling pin, because the more we roll, the harder it's going to become. And we just, again, roll it out in either direction. And what we're looking for is making sure that that butter doesn't ooze out of the dough mix, because we don't want to lose any of the butter at all. So let's work it across that way as well. This first roll is fairly easy, especially with a heavy rolling pin. You do have to put some elbow grease into this and press it down really hard. Now we've rolled it out enough for our first time round, so what we need to do now is just square it up, just make sure it is fairly square. This one's not too bad. And again, we've got to fold it 1/3, 2/3. So we go across 2/3 of the dough mix, like that. Just brush off any surplus flour, and then take the other third, fold that across, like that, and just square it up again. No need to brush that flour off, because we need to use that to stop it sticking on our next roll. So again, we'll put some more flour down. We'll put some flour underneath it as well. And again, if it's got too warm, put it back in the fridge for a while, so it's a fairly cold surface. And then the process carries on all over again. So based on our 9 layers that we have now, we're going to convert it into 27 layers by doing our second roll. And this is where it becomes a little harder and a bit more pressure is needed on the rolling pin. And I'm pleased to say that there's no butter leaking out of it anywhere. One advantage of a marble rolling pin is it stays cold, unlike a wooden one, which is brilliant. So there we go, we've generated the same shape as we had before, and we can do the same process again. And once you've done this, just square it off slightly. Bring over the corners, 1/3 across, get rid of your surplus flour, and then bring across your next piece. There we go, so we've now got 27 layers of dough and butter mix in there. So again, we turn it round. I'll just put some flour underneath just to make sure it doesn't stick. And again, if it's too warm, put it in the fridge. And here we go for our next roll. Right, so here we are again. We've rolled it out. This is the last time. It's been in the fridge a couple of times. We're going to do the same because we want to end up with a minimum of 81 layers. So for the final time, I'm folding this over, and this will be the last time. This is when we have to then roll it out, ready for the cutting process. So there we go. We've now rolled out our dough, and it's about 3 millimeters thick, 3/4 millimeters thick, roughly 1/4 of an inch, all the way around. And we've tried to keep it as square as we possibly can. But with the best will in the world, when you make homemade croissants, they're not all going to look the same, and that's the novelty of them. They're going to look different shapes. But we've now got to cut this into sections. So all we do, we go down the middle and just cut it in half. That's all we're doing. And then we want to shape our croissant. We need to get really triangles if we can. So about that distance from there to the corner, so we get a point going like that. And we'll do another one here. We've cut them all into the shapes they need to be in now. We just need to nick the bottom of each one like that, and that's so we can stretch them when we're doing the roll. So to roll them up, we just grab the two ends and we stretch it like this, fold it over and just roll it up like that. And just make sure that tip sticks like that. And there you've got your croissant, not in a curve but in a straight line. So place it on the tray, but bend it slightly when you do so to get your proper shape, and keep the tail, that bit, underneath whatever happens, so it's that way down. And there we go. Let's do one more. Stretch it out, pull it up like this, tail underneath, onto the tray. Give yourself plenty of room on the tray, and there we go. Inevitably, when you've finished rolling out your dough and cutting the triangles, you're going to end up with some bits. Now, I never throw any bits away, and what I do, I treat Laura and I to a couple of panachocs, and they are so simple. It's using the same ingredients, except you're just going to add chocolate to them. But unlike the ones you buy from or the disappointing ones you can buy from the supermarket, they use cooking chocolate. We use the best chocolate, really nice dark, and just cut it with a knife, just cut it into slight sections like that, just a few off, and put that into your panachoc, and it makes an absolutely gorgeous panachoc. And all I do really is just get some bits, lay them across the dough like that, and then just roll it up like that. And then as soon as you've covered it, get some more bits, sprinkle them across into there, and roll it up again, and repeat the process until you come to the end of the roll. We're nearly there. We'll do one more, and there we are. That's rolled up, and that's all a panachoc is. Nicely sealed in a roll like that, and you make sure the seam goes at the bottom when you put it on the tray. Looks a bit like a sausage. That'll come up beautifully when it's finished. And there we go. The best thing, because butter can run out of the croissant, the best thing you can do is to put it on parchment paper, which is absolutely perfect. And when the croissants come out of the oven, they're so easy to take straight off that parchment paper onto a rack to cool off. Just from experience, we've now got to leave them to rise, and there's no real set time as to how long that will take. We've found that sometimes we leave them up to 6 hours like this for them to rise. So the croissant now have been proving for about 4 hours. and they've nearly doubled in size, and they're about ready now for the cooking stage. But before we cook them, they must have an egg wash. So we'll just do an egg wash on this one, make a start. Got to be careful when you egg wash that you don't pierce them. So you just do it delicately. It does take a little while, but it's worth doing properly, because that'll give it its nice lovely golden colour when it comes out of the oven. There. Now they're all glazed, they're ready to go in the oven, and you need to preheat your oven to 200 degrees centigrade. It's best to put the oven on about 5 minutes before, just so you get it up to temperature. So they need to go in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes, but it's best to keep an eye on them because they can burn if it gets too hot. And if it does get too hot, turn them down to about 190, but keep your eye on it after 15 minutes. So there we go. So the croissants have been in for about 20 minutes, so we'll have a look and see how they get on. And it looks to me like they are perfectly cooked. Let's have a look. Ah, yes. So I'll take them over. No guarantee, all the sizes are the same, and then just put them on the rack to cool down. They're very light, very fluffy, smell absolutely gorgeous, and they're hot. And there's our little sampler, which we will try in a minute. So we can't wait any longer, they're still hot, but we've got to cut into this one to have a look and see what it's like. So here we go. So crumbly. Here we are, lovely texture, all the layers have risen, it looks really lovely. Just ready for a bit of strawberry jam or honey or whatever you like on your croissant.